Okay, so let's bring in Sam with Whitetail Partners. Sam, how are you doing today?
Hey, great, John. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. This is pretty cool, I think. We get to work with a lot of great partners, and we've been working with you now. I want to say 6 or 7 years because we're obviously in the big shop now. But I remember getting orders from you when we were in our small
hmm
shop, and so the name always was familiar, and then we started talking about your new company, but we'll get into that in a minute. So,
hmm
why don't you introduce our listeners and our viewers here on YouTube? Introduce them to Sam Bilhorn, and then eventually we'll get into Whitetail Partners.
Well, yeah, thanks a lot for the intro, John, and again for having me on. Um, I myself, a lifelong hunter and landowner here the last 6, 8 years, and my experience in whitetails just comes from growing up in it and being involved in that. I live and hunt in South central Wisconsin, and have had a lot of experience growing up in it, but as all of us who get into this more and more and become a deer nerd of sorts, that really started to hit for me maybe 10 years ago. And I had a lot of interest in doing these things, and it just started learning everything I could beyond just my own experience, trying to learn from the experience of others, much like many of the people who listen to a podcast like this. And when I started developing my own property and doing things, and like it naturally happens, you talk to friends, you start helping friends, you start helping friends of friends, and before long, you're talking to strangers on a deer property, and you realize that you have a business. And that's really the beginnings of Whitetail Partners. I started doing this professionally about 6 years ago, probably about the time you and I crossed paths. And that's when I was starting to develop plans and all that. Rewinding a little bit, I have education and background in engineering, in construction, and some of those things just came together in how I look at properties. I really saw the opportunity in what I saw in the marketplace to provide plans of extensive detail. You had Jake Illinger on, and I admire him quite a bit. Jake, he brings a ton of detail to his plans, and I looked around the others, and I maybe didn't see that as much. I said, this is something I really enjoy doing, and started doing it for more and more people. And that was really the beginning of the business. Started traveling around, going wherever I could get work. And that took me to, I think it was a total of 14 different states I've been in, and doing deer properties all across the country, really, but focusing on the upper Midwest, and enjoyed doing that quite a bit until getting to the point where I realized enough was enough on the traveling and bouncing around. And that's where a few years ago we started developing the Whitetail Partners Network.
That's a pretty cool story. We talked off air briefly that you're a graduate from Marquette University. It's kind of funny how life works. My
Yeah.
wife, my wife went there too. So, my older
hmm
brother. So yeah, there's a lot of ties to Marquette there. But you talk about the engineering background in Jake. Yeah, I get to see. I'm going to say upwards of 50 plans a year, and
hmm
when maybe not so much from somebody as yourself, but your clients will send them to me, and the they do range from um, not as detailed as say like you or Jake to extremely detailed, and it's quite
hmm
interesting to see that level of detail in your plans. And now that you mentioned, I didn't know that you had the engineering background until actually today,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
find that
Right.
fascinating how that is tied into the final design. But yeah, it's kind of amazing how you see each individual has their own. Not quite sure what the word is. Not trait, but how they present the final product. And with the engineering
Yeah.
background, it all makes sense because yours are very
Yeah.
detailed.
The talent. Thank you. The talent that I see the combination of is really, it's also an artistic
Yeah.
outlet. For me, it's this creative, creative meets logic, and engineering, and you pull it all together along with the fascination for deer and deer hunting.
Sure.
And the plans we make are the result of that.
Okay. Now, we'll get into your team in just a minute here, but
Hmm.
I don't think they all have engineering backgrounds, do they? You might be the only one. I think you guys are up to about 7 or 8 partners now, but does anybody else have an engineering background?
No, no, we all have very different
Sure.
backgrounds, but the common tie there is the experience with whitetails and habitat and all of that. So yeah, very diverse background amongst our team.
Okay. Well, speaking of teams, so we started working together. Let's just call it 6 years ago. I can't quite pinpoint it, um,
Sure.
but you had talked about an expansion a few years ago, and I actually talked to me about that. And
Hmm.
being a partner with you through the food plot, do you want to hit on that? Do you want to talk about your team, how that expanded, what your thought process was going forward? Because you did say I think you hit 14 states, and maybe that travel possibly not that it got old, but it was maybe you could serve clients better with more people. Is that kind of what
Yeah.
happened? Yeah, yeah. If
Well,
you want to
that was
talk
all
about that,
part of it.
sure.
Yeah, that was all part of it. And, focusing on strengths too. So
Hmm.
I looked at what I was doing and yeah, you can say it's the same species and I see deer doing the same thing in all of these different states.
Sure.
However, I am not an expert in every region and state of the country. And, there's more to just the design than perhaps habitat types. Also, it's hunting culture. It's knowing the details of how things function within even a given state or even a region within a state. And one of the things I realized is that others, incorporating others is uh, with the regional model
Hmm.
is using their strengths in their area. It lets them be an expert where they are and allows them to flourish doing it. Plus, as we grow, the workload is there. I mean, part of it also too was the workload was growing,
Hmm.
and that allowed others to come in and be collaborative. Our team works together amazingly well.
Hmm.
We're all independent contractors. We all have the common tie to Whitetail Partners, but you'll hear that we call it out as the Whitetail Partners Network. Each
Hmm.
of these individuals within their location, some covering just a state or two, some covering multiple states, depending on where they're at, and they are doing quite well in the things that they have. We all have this consistent approach, so we share ideas, the concepts of how we do things, the consistency of our quality. That was a huge thing for me, as I mentioned, getting in and starting this up. We wanted to have excellent quality in our plans, our reports, all of our deliverables. We wanted to blow away our clients with that. So I put a lot of time in to make sure that these guys have the tools they need to be successful, to have the uh, experience behind them. Everybody comes in with a different approach, but they have the same tools and approaches now together, so that we're all giving a similar message and explaining things to our clients within our regions.
Okay. So, can you talk about what what region you guys cover now?
Yeah.
I know that I've already worked with you, Greg in Ohio, and Jake here in Michigan, and I've done some seed trials now with Lee down in Tennessee. But you guys have a far bigger reach than
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, you're doing great. So you got those three. Josh was the fourth of our original group. So those the four that we just mentioned are Josh Rayleigh down in Georgia,
Hmm.
and he handles kind of the southeast corner of the country for us there. The three others you mentioned, we also have now added Brennan in New York. Brennan is handling the New England area there.
Hmm.
And then Tim Kaiser in northern Wisconsin. So Tim and I split Wisconsin. I've developed a larger workload here in the southern half of the state and content being here.
Hmm.
And then also Dylan is in Kansas. Dylan has a tremendous amount of experience in East Kansas and the
Hmm.
areas around there. And then finally, our newest ad is Tim Menaher he's out of Cincinnati, but he handles Southern Illinois and Southern Indiana for us.
So you guys got a lot of reach on the whitetail
Hmm.
range. Are you guys looking at um, Colorado, Montana? Because we have a lot of clients out there, a lot of customers out there.
Yeah,
Is there's
I'm happy to hear that. Yeah,
mm-hmm,
we we definitely have room to take on more, especially in I'll call it overall Western states, and
sure.
I hate to call like Texas Western, but it is as far as our reach is
Sure.
concerned. We are a little bit limited getting up to the Rockies there, but at the same point in time too, we've kind of grown as we've had the need for it,
Mm-hmm.
and we haven't pushed too far in those areas, but I'm sure that's coming. And if we have diehard listeners out there that are interested in those areas, it may be something we can talk about.
Well, I think going forward, and we talked about this off air, that we're going to try to make this a weekly segment to talk to our partners because I want to talk about things that not a lot of people talk about and questions that not a lot of people, um, the hosts of these other podcasts, don't ask. But one of the things we talk to people a lot, and we hear this a lot, we see this a lot, is our friends down south. You're always talking
Hmm.
about Michigan. You're always talking
Yeah,
about the Midwest. So
yeah. Lee and Josh would
yeah,
speak up right now
yeah,
and cheer you
yeah.
on. You
Lee's
bet.
probably raising his hand saying, "I'm ready," because I talked to Lee about this already. I've not had a lot of conversation with Josh yet, but I do believe to our friends in the southern third of the country, southern half, we will have some folks on from down south. Down south,
Hmm.
we will have those
Yep.
folks on and get their ideas and their theories and stuff like that. I don't want this to just become another regional podcast. I want this to be something for everyone. And honestly, talking with folks that hunt down south, and you talked about culture, you talked about that kind of thing. I find that fascinating. I mean, I know what the culture here in Michigan.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There's so much to learn and
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and that ties into our regional approach.
sure.
That's why we wanted to do it that way, is
Hmm.
to be experts within a region, and I really tout those guys down there. We probably are going to be ready for somebody in Texas before long
Sure.
here, as I mentioned before. But yeah, the southern guys, they have a lot of different things they're working with
Sure.
than us guys in the north.
Yeah. Well, I find it funny how like we drive to Florida or Texas every year for spring break. I just
Hmm.
like to drive because I like to see the country. And we're driving,
Yeah.
and my wife and kids are talking about the scenery. And all I'm thinking about is, I wonder what I could get to grow in the soil. I wonder what grows well here.
Right on.
So,
Yeah, right on.
but anyway, yes. Again, to our friends that are listening that are down south, um, we've got some great things coming for you folks too. So.
Hmm.
Is there anything else you want to talk about, Sam, as far as your partners in your company?
Well, I think I've covered a lot of different
Hmm.
ground. I mean, we'll have more topics to speak on as we get going, but
Hmm.
overall, just wanted to emphasize that our team is vast and covers the entire whitetail range. We'll travel beyond, just the states I mentioned anyway,
Sure. Now,
to help folks out.
okay, so you and I, again, we were talking about this off air, but you guys now have a YouTube channel, and is it a weekly podcast? I can't remember. It's kind of a Zoom call
Sure.
podcast thing. Can you touch on that a little bit if people want to kind of
Yeah.
watch and hear what you guys have to say?
Y- Yeah, you bet. So on the YouTube and also podcast side, we post our podcast on YouTube.
Hmm.
Design, Build, Hunt is
Okay.
the podcast we call it, and that's
Sure.
touching on those points of our services: designing, planning out and consulting on properties, building, the land management piece. We're getting more and more into that, helping clients build out their properties, and then obviously hunt. We talk about hunting strategy
Sure.
and how to go about being successful in the fall.
Okay, and I've watched a couple of them where you guys actually, I believe it was start to finish. Let's say Greg did a property in Ohio, and you guys,
Hmm.
three or four of you guys get together, and then you kind of walk through Greg's ideas, how he laid the plan out, and I've seen a couple of that. Pretty fascinating to get not only his perspective, but a couple of you other guys like maybe Jake or Lee or yourself chime in on, hey, I like this idea. Why did you check? Why did you choose this? And
Hmm.
it's kind of a way. So if somebody's got a similar property, and again with the reach that you guys have, more than likely you're going to do a property similar to what somebody's watching, and it's kind of fascinating how you guys walk through the process of how you actually build a plan.
hmm Yeah, the plan breakdowns have been very popular, and
Hmm.
we're not hiding those. I mean, we want to show it because the thing I like to tell people too is every property is unique, and even more so, every landowner is unique.
Sure.
And you put those two together, and you're going to come up with a different plan every time. I mean,
Hmm.
the elements are the same. If somebody's going to study this and really take it to heart and understand the principles,
Hmm.
they're going to come up with some great ideas for their property if they don't want to have us out
Hmm.
for a paid service.
Hmm.
And that's great. We're helping those folks out, and that's what it's all about. And for those who might take interest and want to have that customized plan, we'll be
Hmm.
there for them when they're ready.
That's cool. Yeah, you guys got some phenomenal videos. I really like that
Thanks,
because
John.
a lot of them are. I to me nowadays, and I've said this before. A lot of what you see on YouTube now is like watching the WWE. I just sponsors and blah blah blah. I lose interest. But when I can
Yeah.
learn, when I can learn something, you've got my attention. And I think there's a shift. You're starting to see that more and more. Okay, I think people, if they want to be entertained, they're going to go to TikTok. Okay, and that's just my thought. But if
Sure.
people can, if they're going to spend 45 minutes watching social media, teach me something, help me improve my land, help me improve my deer hunting. Don't just sell me your latest sponsored products. And that's just my take on it, and that's just the take I hear from a lot of our customers. And when I watch your YouTube videos and listen to your podcast, I'm learning something every time. So, and I
Yeah. Thank you
appreciate
for
that.
that.
Sure, sure.
We we try to bring value in everything we do. We want to bring quality to the time we're spending on things because
Sure.
that's how we help people.
Okay. Well, let's bring some value here. I've
Yeah.
got some questions that, I think it's going to help me, but it's going to help the folks watching on YouTube and listening here. So, first off, Sam, now you're in southern Wisconsin. Okay.
hmm
When you do plans, are you doing mostly egg areas or are you doing big woods? Because that's going to tie into my question.
Yeah. Well, in northern Wisconsin, we have a lot more big woods.
Hmm.
Obviously, you know that. That's similar to where you're at.
Sure.
But the in southern Wisconsin, well, let me back up. Wisconsin as a state has an incredibly diverse landscape, and the amount of habitat types is endless. Really, I mean, we
Sure.
have everything.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, I see really, I like to say I see all of it. Now, focusing generally on southern Wisconsin, and then I'll throw in there southeastern Minnesota,
Hmm.
eastern Iowa, northern Illinois. It is what I'll call farm country and hill country, just to generalize.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And we have those two types. We also have lowland parcels.
Hmm.
There's a handful of those in south central Wisconsin too. So we have that. I was just on one of those last week, and those are fascinating in a different way. But yeah, so those are the types we see. But again, little bit of everything. Um, with Tim taking northern Wisconsin, he's got a lot more of the big woods stuff going on.
Sure. Okay, so the question I have is can maybe just can you kind of describe, do you have like not so much a one size fits all approach to food plots, but what is your average recommendation? I mean, my favorite is that 3-strip system planting. That's my favorite planting method, and if I
hmm
can get folks when they call me, I don't design habitat plans. We send them your way or Jake or somebody that I think
hmm
regionally can be, you know, um, a big help. But if they call me for a habitat plan, I'm really trying to talk them into this 3-strip system, and depending on what their soil is. So that being said, is there something you have in the back of your mind that, man, this really hits a home run for food plots for fall? Can you kind of describe your thought process on food plots?
Yeah. Well, zooming way out first, and I'll get down to the ground level real quick to answer your question. But
Hmm.
zooming out first is answering that question of how much. And generally, that is a question of, how much food is around them already. If you get into these bigger woods settings, and we do have that in central Wisconsin, um, you're looking and saying, I want to try and get more food here if we can,
Hmm.
because generally, with less ag, you want to have more food on a property, just as a general tenet. So that's number one. Number two is what can they do? I emphasize custom plans. Not everybody's going to be able to do, 4, 5, 6, 8 or more acres of plots. They may be limited on that. So part of that is
Sure.
balancing that custom piece of the owner. Now zooming in a little bit, starting to talk about where can we have plots? Do we need to do clearing? All these other things like as a designer, the where part is really important to me.
Hmm.
Common mistake is seeing plots in the wrong spot, and that sort of thing. But then now getting down to the question you asked is, what do you put in the plots? I love to see diversity whenever we can. So generally speaking, our smaller kill plots, maybe they're a quarter acre, even a couple tenths of an acre, up to a half acre. Those you can't cram in too many different things in terms of strips, like you mentioned.
Right.
It gets to be a little cumbersome, and you just don't have the real estate to work with.
Hmm.
So those we're generally focusing on. Maybe it's one product, maybe two. And if they're smaller kill plots, a lot of times they're shaded
Hmm.
or they're by shade. I do point a lot of time to your seclusion blend
Hmm.
in terms of providing clover chicory and having, this is just a pass through plot, right? So
Sure.
you're getting them for a moment. You're trying to get them to stop, take a bite or two as they move on to something else. Getting into those medium and larger size plots, now you're talking about strips or chunks, however the shape is. And the architecture sometimes will, it'll vary depending on how we do that because strips aren't always the easiest thing. And then rotations too, because, year after year, it's going to be, maybe you're bouncing some things around.
Hmm.
Um, More and more, I am trying to bring in some spring planted grains if we have the real estate for it. Generally, if you're getting up into multiple acres of plots, it's hard to beat in late season. It's hard to beat having all of those things on the plate. Your brassicas, and then also beans and corn
Yep.
if you have the space for them
Hmm.
and you have access to get those planted properly. Those are very helpful. But yeah, back to the strip part. You might have. My go-to is to have a brassica on one side, maybe put some tillage radish in it, and then a fall forage type blend. And I think
Right.
yours is called fall forage,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
And that on another strip, and then maybe that beans or corn that you're eventually getting them to, not in a distant like destination field, but maybe it's an acre of beans, let's say for example, on one side of the field, and the um, uh, strips of those other fall greens I mentioned
Hmm.
on the other.
Do you have them? And this is something we're starting to play with. We just had that Milo product come out, and we're so folks not in egg areas might try to have something similar to corn. But do
Hmm.
you ever recommend, say, if they're planting beans, a green overseed of anything? Same thing with corn. Do you ever
Yeah.
try to stack food on top of food? Do you ever do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have it in strips and you got some sunlight, or beans as they're starting to get to that
Hmm.
when they're starting to you know mature and lose their leaves,
Hmm.
and you're going to get that. You're opening up that soil.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting rye or any number of things on top of that, as long as there's enough growing season.
Sure.
And you have that late season or short season, I think it's
Yeah.
called,
Yeah. I was just gonna ask.
brassica.
Yep.
Maybe that's another one to throw into that because at that point in time you're starting to look at growing season. How
Yeah.
much do I have left, depending on where I'm at. And I want to be careful because don't want to overgeneralize, because somebody in northern Wisconsin versus somebody in southern Illinois, you're talking weeks or
Weeks for sure.
more
Yeah. Hmm.
of growing season difference that can make all the world a difference in what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit that point. And we actually recommend that for beans. I don't recommend our sweet feast because the maturity dates, and they grow taller and slower, but they
Hmm.
produce an insane amount of tonnage. Now, the short season, they're shorter plants, shorter varieties, shorter growing, and albeit you might, like, we'll recommend to somebody, let's say down by Lee, you might be planting in Tennessee a brassica blend, when the weather starts to cool down. We're looking at maybe end of August. I could still take the short season brassica in middle of August or early, I wouldn't say so much early August up here, and overseed beans with it because you're getting less sunlight. So they're going to grow slower. So now instead of a 45-day, it might be a 60-day because you're just growing slower because you don't have the sunlight. But
Sure.
when people want to
Right.
overseed a brassica into beans, depending on, I'm at, okay, what's your spacing? Did you broadcast them? How thick are they? Are they canopied out? We
Hmm.
might be hitting them with that short season brassica instead. But yeah, that's a great point. But yeah, I really like that food on food kind of stacking it because like I look between corn rows and I look between bean rows and I'm like, man, that is a lot of
A lot
space,
of soil.
a lot of soil that could be more
Right.
deer food. Yeah, I mean, like right now the beans are all gone just about everywhere, but a lot of
Yeah.
folks. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, especially for the guys who have smaller acreage,
Yep.
this is something to pick up on because you're dealing with every square foot, like it
That's what we're trying to do.
matters.
Yep.
And, for the guys who might have plenty of acres they're doing food plots on, it might be good from a diversity standpoint,
Sure.
but for those who have smaller properties, smaller plots, and that's the majority,
hmm
this topic is huge.
Yeah. One of the things, and I talk a lot about rye, and a lot of guys roll their eyes at me, and I'm like, you know what? Honestly, it might not be the most attractive thing in your area in the fall, but a lot of times, and especially all my plots up here, I am looking for that green food the second the snow melts. And
Sure, on the other end, you bet.
yes, I've been to Illinois a couple times hunting, and I these guys that I hunted with an outfitter, and the amount of land that he owned and leased was insane. And I'd said
Hmm.
to him one day, I said, "What do you think these deer are eating?" And I talked about rye, and he's like, "Nah, I'm not going to do that because then the farmers would be pissed off." And I said, "What are these deer eating when the snow melts?" Well, they're sticks and berries and acorns. And I said, "Could you imagine putting 13 to 14% protein in their belly? From snow melt until, and these are big. This is row crop areas. Like Pike County.
Hmm.
When I'm driving around Pike County, Brown, I don't see alfalfa. Okay, that's not dairy, and maybe there is, and I just didn't see it. I said, "Do you understand how much? I can't say you're going to put 10 inches on a deer or anything like that." I said, "But you are in the business of growing and selling hunts for giant deer. If you
Hmm.
had rye for these deer, the amount of protein going into these deer is huge." And that's why
Hmm.
I recommend to folks on when we do food plot plans for people, somehow, some way, you need to have cereal rye. And if it's not just for fall attraction, and like in the northern part of my state here in Michigan, it's a twin to Wisconsin. That's great
Hmm.
fall food, and it's great food in the spring and when they need it the most. And I think cereal rye is one of the most um, looked over food plot plantings there is.
Yeah, and it's cheap and easy, and it
Yeah,
grows.
it
So
does.
there's some more positives to throw at it there
hmm
too. And you can, if you got any sort of bare spots,
hmm
put it on.
Yeah.
And then the benefits you have the next spring, especially when you go to, if you let it go for a while and
hmm
then you mow it, and just the amount of thatch and organic and everything else you're creating.
hmm
There are more benefits beyond just that narrow time frame we're thinking about in the fall, where we might say, well, it's not quite as attractive.
Right. I fully agree with that. I think there's more the benefits, the positives. Yeah, the positives far outweigh the negatives for rye. And the only negative I could see for rye in an area like where you're at, it might be lower on the attraction pyramid than say like beans, corn, brassicas, clovers. But to me, as a land manager, a steward of the land, I'm always thinking about how, trying to help these deer. And the other thing is, it's great for turkeys when it comes back and it's 6 to 10 inches
Hmm.
tall. Yeah, I think there's a huge
Yeah,
benefit there. Yep.
and soil too. I mean, we haven't talked much about this yet, but in some of these areas, we get into really lean soils, sandy soils. I think there's strong benefit there too, especially when you're
Yep.
starting out a plot. When you're just beginning and you're maybe open the ground for the first time,
hmm
it is a great cover to go to, and it's more pH tolerant and all these things that it's there's so many uses for it.
Do you find a lot of rye in your plans? Do you see yourself, or maybe some of your guys that work in say northern Michigan, northern Wisconsin, where the soil isn't very good? Do you find a lot of
Yeah,
guys? Yeah, cereal
it's
grains and
something
rye.
we point to a lot,
Sure.
like in all the things we've just gone through, whether it's mixing it in, supplementing, stacking, all these things that we just mentioned. but also, and that's why I wanted to tie it together there too, is in those areas. I deal with a lot of our sand counties in that central Wisconsin area, and it's a great one, especially with people just starting out, and plus to get success. Just to have
Sure.
that start of something. I like it when you clear a timber plot to just put that stuff down and get something green growing and get a start. Especially any amount of attraction at that point when you're just starting out is going to be a step forward. The other thing to talk about, it kind of ties into rye, is some of those soil builder
Hmm.
uh, blends that you have too.
Yeah. And maybe you can speak on your philosophy a little bit. I mean, I'm not so much an egg area, might not, if you're planting spring grains. My philosophy here, and I'm not sure how much you guys recommend this, is there's got to be something always growing in that food plot. And depending on where you're at, like you said, Wisconsin and Michigan's, I mean, the soils in Michigan and Wisconsin mirror each other. The further north you go, the worse the soil gets. And
Yep.
yeah, um, what
Sorry,
I
John.
no, but it's true. I mean, the folks in northern Michigan, that's why we developed our soil builder, because of them, and it works extremely well in Wisconsin. But our philosophy is that whether it's deer food or soil food, I want something planted there all the time. We can't really mimic those, the soil health, the principles of soil health, keep the ground covered, da da da. It's night and day difference between farming and food plotting. But I always want to keep the ground covered, keep something green growing, whether it's deer food or soil food. But again, it's a lot
Yeah.
different than like a corn and a beans. Can you kind of hit on that? Do you guys find yourself putting that into plans, like a summer, maybe not so much a soil builder, but something growing in the summer?
Absolutely, and also depending on planting methods that
Mm-hmm.
people have. If you get it, you want to talk about cover crops. We talked about rye before. A common rotation is to get rye down in the fall, let that come up in the spring, mow it or terminate it, get that down or crimp it. All this, and then getting into that summer blend. And that might be a short season. That might be a 6 week growing season for
Mm-hmm.
that, whatever. Or, and buckwheat is another common one we hear of, or mixed in with your blend or
Mm-hmm.
soil builder blend. But anyway, getting that in and then rolling right into terminating that and getting your fall blends planted. If you're further north, maybe that's late July, further south, early mid August,
Mm-hmm.
and even later as further south in the country you go. But yeah, getting into those rotations, because some people with their planting methods and equipment and limitations, those that might be a great way for them to go. In addition to the principles of soil health and
Sure.
cover crops and all those things.
But you guys really aren't recommending just keep the plot bare and spray, 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 or disc it or whatever. You guys have something on those food plots.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have, and I would assume, I don't want to really speak for you yet, but I would assume um, it's going to vary by region. But do you guys have a go-to or a favorite summer? I don't want to call it a cover crop or a soil builder, but do you guys have something that you really like in the summer that you recommend fairly heavy, or is it just going to basically depend on region,
And
locate?
region and soil type too,
Yeah,
because I generally for me, I'm going to point to the soil builder, which
yeah,
maybe you could break that down a little bit.
sure.
But then also, buckwheat is like rye. It's very easy. You
Hmm.
can just cast it out on the ground after you get your rye terminated, run a cultipacker over it, and it's going to grow.
Okay,
And I think that it is there. You can speak to this, and this is where we defer people to you because
sure.
you're the food plot seed expert. Is the benefits of having multiple species going,
Yeah.
and all of that. But
Hmm.
I think that getting something going, even if it's for a short growing season, is helpful.
Yeah. The problem I think we found with buckwheat, and maybe Jake um, Hendrickson can hit on this a little bit when I talk to him. Uh, the problem we were finding with buckwheat is the further north you went, and again, this is both Wisconsin and Michigan, and the soils get worse. The
Hmm.
woods settings get bigger, and you have that green half acre, 1 acre, 2 acre field of buckwheat. It suddenly becomes deer food in late June,
Yeah.
early July. So, and
We
they,
don't struggle. We don't have that
yeah,
struggle in the South. Yeah, it's totally
yeah,
different for us. I mean,
yeah,
it gets nipped on the edges, but very rarely are the deer out just mowing it
yeah.
down. You know
That's
that, and you're right. Big wood setting, totally different. That's
sure.
not what I'm speaking to
Yep,
as much in the farm or hill
sure.
country.
Yeah,
There is food. 360 degrees. It's everywhere.
yeah, yeah. It's a night and day difference, and I think that's fascinating how now you've got more regional. Um,
Yeah.
some of these guys, they live this every day. They live this crappy soil, big woods, and there might be tricks that if we do this, this actually works much better up here than it does on there. That's actually
Right on.
really
Yeah,
good
those are
thinking.
the details we're talking about
Yep.
within the region. And
Hmm.
for us specifically, one of the things I would point to with it is I do think deer have a strong preference to beans, and beans are everywhere.
Sure.
The bean fields, that spring forage that they're getting there,
Yep.
early summer forage,
Hmm.
they go to that over the buckwheat nine
Oh, for
times out of
sure.
10.
Yeah, we cannot grow beans up here. I mean, I had a buddy that planted. Oh man, it was 6 7 years ago. He did a 3 acre planting. I think it was the eagle bean, and we fenced it
Hmm.
off until mid to late July, and it was about 2.5 3 feet tall. It was gone in 2 weeks. It was gone. I mean, we just cannot grow soybeans up here. The
Yeah,
only way you would is fencing it off. And my personal thing
yeah,
is, I'm not a big fan of fencing food plots off. I'd rather try to find
yeah.
something that's going to work. But what we're trying to mess with is, I'm not sure if you've seen we talked about that Milo before, and what we're trying to do.
Yeah,
I can't, like, you guys could do a beans corn combo down there. What I'm trying to do up here is a Milo winter pea combo up here, and we're trying to get the same results because I've seen
sure.
them eat the pods, the pea pods. I've seen them eat that, and
Hmm.
we're trying to do that up here because it's such, grains. I think are a great draw, but I just can't grow them up here. I can't. I mean, we've got bears, raccoons, deer. I mean, I can't get corn up here to last, past the 4th of
Yeah.
July. And then if it does make it, you say you do produce a cob in September, if you've got bears around, we've got them up here.
They just mow down the
It's
field.
gone. Yeah, it's gone. So
Yeah.
I can't imagine what a 4 acre cornfield in the middle of 1,000 acres of big woods would look like without a fence
No,
around it. So,
totally different
yep,
story there.
yep.
In that case, you might just be trying to grow
Hmm.
any sort of fall food
Yep.
source and
Yeah,
run with it.
that's what we're
So,
doing.
the
So,
one thing you mentioned peas.
hmm,
I love peas. I think peas grow, and they grow really well in the
yeah,
soils that I
hmm,
have. I've even mixed them in with the buckwheat for a uh, summer blend,
sure.
just to get stuff growing, and they take really
Yeah,
well.
I think I really like the winter peas. Like, we're always messing with stuff. I've got a garden here that I can fence in, and usually half of it's for the garden, the other half is for experiments. Like, we were messing around with some sun hemp and the best nitrogen production I've found by far is winter pea. The nodules on the winter peas. It outnumbered on the sun hemp 10 to 1. It was amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good to know.
But yeah, so I think one of my favorite spring planting for a summer plow down is winter peas at about 50 to 100 pounds an acre, 50 pounds of oats, and then we'll add some berseem clover to it just so the ground is completely covered. I don't want any bare spots. Like, if you did oats and peas, you're going to have bare spots because they both are, they don't spread like, say, a beans is real bushy, and it'll block out a lot of sunlight. I really like that planting if we're not having to do our soil builder blend, but I like that peas, because they have such great nitrogen production, oats, and then berseem clover. Really good
And the
summer blend.
peas will climb. They climb on
Yeah,
anything. So
they'll try to.
your
Yeah.
oats or your
Hmm.
yeah or your I found that like I said with the little bit of buckwheat in there, that
Sure.
gives a
They'll
nice
climb right
stalk
up
for them
there
to climb.
for sure.
And I had those 5 feet tall.
Yeah.
The peas are just growing
Yeah.
out the top. So
So, okay. So, moving on to our next question. When you guys go to the property yourself, but maybe when you guys have your group discussions, what are the biggest mistakes you're seeing landowners make when it comes to food plots? You say you show up to a property, and right off the bat you're like, yeah, this is completely wrong, or you need to do this different. What can you talk about some of the mistakes for people
Yeah.
that are trying to learn. Like I said, I like education videos, podcasts. What are the what are the things you guys see um, people making mistakes?
Yeah. So in the planning stage and the consulting that we do to create design for a property, the biggest thing we see, and this is getting back to the beginning of our discussion here, that, zooming way out is where is the food plot? A lot of times for us, it's really just having food in the wrong spot. Think of a common one might be right in the middle of a property. They go clear a spot, and then they hang two stands on that food plot, and they march in there and do a deer drive to get to how they're getting there. So all these things that they're doing wrong in our minds of access and disruption and hunting pressure and all these things. So a lot of times we're looking at it and saying, the benefit of what you're trying to create there, you're dismantling it by how you're hunting it or what you're doing. And a lot of times we're making recommendations to abandon plots.
Sure.
Sometimes people they have a food plot somewhere because, well, that's the only place I could, or it was a convenient place. It was already clear, so I did it. And I totally get how that happens. That is a really normal thing for folks as they are starting to get into habitat and food plots and all that. That's pretty normal. But so that's the biggest thing we see is making recommendations to move plots to different locations, and that ties into access. How do you get at them if you're going to hunt them? Where positioning of them, tying it into many things: the topography, the soil types, the how big of an area is it, getting sunlight, and all these different things start to come into play. But I'd say that's number one,
Hmm.
is how where it's at. Number two is probably the size. Sometimes people have good deer movement. Let's say they have buck movement. All right, I'm gonna put a kill plot in here, and I'm gonna hunt this location, and I'm gonna get them. This buck's gonna slip into here, and maybe their thinking is right, but their execution's wrong, and they go in there and they create a 3/4 acre plot. It's in a buck's mind. It's huge. It's
Hmm.
scary. It's something that they then avoid, and then they work around it. And maybe we would suggest they keep that plot, perhaps, or we'll neck it down and
Hmm.
let do some edge feathering and try and make it smaller. And then we're hunting inside the timber adjacent to the plot. And
Correct. Yeah.
they might be thinking, hey, I don't want to hunt. I want to hunt on the food plot. That's where he's going to be. Well,
No.
as you can see from the sign and this trail and some of these things, he's kind of skirting around the plot. He might be scenting it and seeing what's there, but he's not coming out there to eat. You know,
Correct.
um, and so these are bigger design principles, which is where our minds are heavily focused on the front end of this.
Hmm.
So those things, as rightfully we should with your podcast, dive right into the soils and the seeds and the layout and those things.
Hmm.
Those are important, but that's like step 5 and 6 in our
Sure.
minds
Yep.
of what are we putting in that plot, and then also recognizing the other professionals around us, and we direct people to you to say, hey, you know this is where, and these are generally what, but consult with John. He might have some more specifics for you and get you the right stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think again, I don't do this, but when I look at something for my own property, the very first thing I'm looking at access, and I'm looking at where the food is. But the more and more I do this, the more and more I understand I do not want to be on the big food. And my favorite sit every year um, has always been the first bow hunt of the year, and I'm on the big food plot because I want to see all the deer. I want to see
Yeah.
what we've created. And I'll be honest with you, I think of maybe the 10 years I've done that, I've shot one deer. So it's
Right.
not, I enjoy that part of it, but the deer
Well,
that
what are you looking to do?
yeah,
Some guys,
yeah.
that's what they want to do. They want to go out there and see a bunch of deer,
Sure.
or perhaps it's different. We're not
Hmm.
talking bow hunters anymore. It's
Yeah.
the dad or grandpa with his son or grandson
Hmm.
going out there during their first youth season or
Yeah.
rifle season, and
Hmm.
they want to have that experience in the
Yep.
blind and all those. It's totally different
Yeah.
depending on the hunter and what you're trying to accomplish.
But you talked about that big buck not going on that 3/4 acre food plot. And I found myself, my own hunts, especially this year, if you can get off the food and the food plot that I shot that 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 big deer and muzzleloader with, it was only 7 feet, no, 10 feet wide, maybe if that, and it was thick on both sides. And he felt very comfortable in it, 45 minutes before dark. But we were 150 yards off the main food plot.
Right.
So
Yeah, those
that's the
tiny
kind of setup.
little
Yep.
plots.
Yep. That's when I'm doing a property for myself. Like I said, I don't do this for people. Um, that's what I'm looking for. Where can I get some small kill plots? How close to his bedding can I get? And that's what I'm kind of looking for. But do you find that, like I said, I fully admit that my first hunt of the every year is going to be on the big food plot just as an observation sit.
Yeah.
Do you find that that's a big mistake people make, that they put these beautiful food plots in, which I think are necessary? My personal opinion is the number one way to attract deer on most properties is to have food. Do you find
Hmm.
when you guys go to these properties, do you find that that seems to be, a big box blind on a food plot, or, you know, something of that nature? Do you find that that's a mistake, or you might tell them, hey, this might not be conducive to shooting a big deer? Is that something you guys find and discuss a lot?
Oh, I think that's a very common discussion and talking about travel-based hunting and getting these pinch points within timber or
Hmm.
cover, and the hunting setups we create in our majority of time that we're seeing these interactions with mature bucks is
Hmm.
is those type of setups. Now, with the food plots, like you mentioned, the tiny kill plots, the narrow little trail plots, as I
Sure.
call them, these
Hmm.
long narrow ones, those are equally good. But yeah, the big food plots, as you mentioned, I look at that and say that's a great attraction. It's a great way to see a bunch of deer. It's a great
Sure.
hunt to have with kids. I do tons of hunting with my son Jake, and I'll take him to those locations because a good night for us is, hey, we saw
Hmm.
8 or 10 deer. That
Yeah.
was great. And $4. How
Yeah.
cool is that to see those on the plot?
That's a great
Now,
point.
the two things my mind goes to that are common mistakes that are very important to address is, number one is, where is that blind and how do you get to it?
Yep.
Because a lot of times the common mistake we see is big food plot and the blind is right in the middle of it,
Hmm.
12 feet off the ground. Okay, so, okay, let's get that blind back up off the plot. It doesn't need to be as high. You enter it from the backside, and voila, you're never impacting deer in how you're accessing this thing. So that's number one. And number two is breaking it up, whether that's with some annual screen or some switchgrass, and just developing little fingers and funnels and shapes within. Or I
Hmm.
use corn for this too, just developing some strips of corn to break up a plot. I think that's great because it invites curiosity, which
Yes.
will definitely play on your bucks. And I've since doing that on my plots, we see more mature buck activity. You'll have a big buck, rather than maybe come to the edge of the plot and look around and head back into the timber. He might come out into that plot and kind of root around, and he might cruise through pretty quick, but you're going to have that opportunity you're looking for even
Hmm.
on your big plot.
That's actually, I'm going to write that down because that might, like, when we have you back, um, I want to talk about that because the property that we're working on now, where I shot that big buck on, we had uh, one of my buddies, Brandon, with First Choice Food Plots, come in, and the problem with this property here is typical with big woods. I cannot grow enough food. So what we ended up doing was mulching out another, I want to say, 3/4 to an acre of food. But what we
Hmm.
did is we didn't make one giant field. Okay, so we didn't have 2 acres of food, or we have 2 acres of food, but it's all broken up. Like, we left, there was some balsam and autumn olive, and we left
Right.
like a 10-foot wall between the current food plot and the new food plot. And we put strategic openings, and there's a lot of edge between the food plots. And I think when I was doing a video, if we wanted somebody covering that food plot, 100% of the time, opening day deer season, we'd have to have 5 deer stands, and the food plot's
Right.
only
No,
two
that's
and a half
cool.
acres. And I think that's a concept that's going to gain a lot of traction, is breaking these food plots up, with, like you said, switchgrass, or like our Milo or our food plot screen or something like that.
Tree
Tree
plantings too. Your
plantings.
long
Yep.
term.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I
What
think edge is
you
going to be
said
huge.
something. You said something there too. I'll jump on is if you're carving this thing out, be very careful because you have wonderful resources and trees that took years or decades
Sure.
to create
Mm-hmm.
that don't lose them. Let those be your pieces of how you break this up. When you're
Mm-hmm.
clearing that new plot, analyze every tree and say, should I keep this one? And err on keeping them. It's
Mm-hmm.
really easy to cut them down
Sure.
later and
Yep.
add to it, but
Mm-hmm.
you're doing that, and not just your big plots, your tiny little kill plots. I like to keep trees within them
Okay.
just to have that more of that closed cover
Mm-hmm.
and food. It's more inviting to the bucks.
I think yeah, I would fully agree. We saw more on this particular ground this year on these food plots, with cameras and just personal observation. I saw more deer activity well before dark. And again, a lot of that has to go with, access, being smart with the wind, and how these food plots are laid out. I saw more activity than a property I was working on that had a giant 4-acre wide open food plot. I saw more
Hmm.
activity into late October, early November, daylight activity than I did on these giant food plots that we have on other properties. And I can tell you, every food plot now that we have, even if it's a 6-foot row of whether it's the Milo or the sorghum screen, every one of them is going to start getting broken up now.
Yep. Another thing I would throw in there too, and you can do this when you're working with corn, is during the summer to mow strips
Mm-hmm.
within it.
Sure.
And when I say a strip, I'm not talking like a bowling lane. I'm talking like a snake through the field.
Mm-hmm.
And just adding it, mowing down the corn, or I do this through beans too,
Mm-hmm.
and then doing those fall greens into them or brassicas into them,
Yeah.
and creating these sidewalks through your grains.
Sure.
And I think that's been really helpful on our property to see the deer. They basically start to use those things like sidewalks through the field, and lo and behold, they all come to a hub
Mm-hmm.
25 feet from my stand at a mock scrape, so.
Yeah. So, speaking of mock scrapes, and I think this will be the last question. When you guys do food plots, are you adding? I call them goodies. Are you adding mock scrapes? Are you adding water holes? Is that something you add, say, between food plots? Do you add them on your kill plots? Like all my kill plots have a water hole on it, and I'm fortunate enough to live in areas that have a lot of lowland, so I can dig a foot and I've got water. So all my water holes, I think 95% of them are something I dug with a mini excavator. Can you kind
Hmm.
of comment on that? Do you add that to your kill plots? What do you guys recommend, or is it just
Yeah.
is it property specific?
Well, everything is always specific and varies depending on the situation.
Sure.
But first of all, mock scrapes. I don't have a stand or a blind that doesn't have a mock scrape somewhere,
Okay.
that I can kill a deer on.
Mm-hmm.
I am high on those, and the corridors interconnecting the system that
Mm-hmm.
we create and we design. You want to essentially for it to be a scrape line. You want them to go
Sure.
from spot to spot to spot. A story for another day, but I
Yep.
shot
Yep.
a buck. I shot a buck on a corridor that I got pictures of him coming my way for 700 yards on that corridor, and
Wow.
he hit three other scrapes on the way, and then I killed him right in front of me.
That's cool.
That you're creating scrape lines,
Mm-hmm.
but so I'm high on that, and in the open field settings, that is a little bit more challenging to do, whether it's on posts or cutting a tree down and putting it in. Cedars are great for that.
Sure.
A few of these different things and methods we can talk another time. But
Mm-hmm.
water holes, I'm a lot more sparing with those. I like water holes to be on my best timber corridor setups, where you have pinch points. Hill country comes to mind. The tops of drainages that only point on that whole 20 or 40 acres where he's getting through that spot. That's where I want him, because those are really some of the best opportunities in my mind to kill a buck.
Okay.
So I'm more focused on that. I will use them in kill plots from time to time,
Okay.
but usually these are really tiny, narrow, almost like a wooded corridor. They just happen to have some food on the ground. And those are the times I'm using them. But Very rarely, if ever, am I putting them in a field, and that's more specific to custom to the hunter.
Hmm.
Perhaps it's a, you know, senior gentleman that's only going to rifle hunt, and there's a reason to put the water hole there because that's one of 3 blinds he's going to hunt.
Sure.
You know, and in those situations where you put all your eggs in one basket,
Hmm.
um, I don't often put water holes on big plots.
Okay. Interesting. So, say somebody wants to get a hold of you and hire one of you or your partners. How do we get a hold of you guys? Talk about your website. Talk about your YouTube channel and your podcast. How do we get a hold of you for possibly a land consult, or B,
Hmm.
watch some of your content?
Right on. Well, just head on over to our website, whitetailpartners.com, or just Google Whitetail Partners. It'll pop up. And you can see all of our everything you can get from our website, whether it's the podcast, the YouTube. Also, we have a tab on our website called Learning Center,
Okay.
and that's where all of our free content is. For those who like articles, we got piles of those there. And then that you can head on over to YouTube, watch some videos. So there's all kinds of content there. From the website, you can reach out, just fill out the couple line questionnaire there to give your contact information. Once we receive that, we'll get it to the right person in your region, and they'll be in touch to help you out.
Awesome. Any closing thoughts? Anything you'd want to hit on before we end this?
Well, I just want to thank you.
Yeah.
It's been great to be a part of this, have the partnership that we do. Want to encourage people to look hard at the people you're going to hire. You know, consider what you're getting and what you're doing, and reach out if you need help. We'd be happy to help you.
Sounds good. Well, yeah, I really appreciate the partnership. That's one thing um, I've emphasized with folks is that we're trying to work with the best, and everything we've done with you guys has been wonderful. You've got a lot of can't speak right now. You have a lot of intelligent people who are very passionate about hunting and getting things done right. And I think I've worked with customers from each one of your partners, and nothing but total professionalism working with them. And it's a real honor to work with you guys, and can't thank you enough. So.
Likewise, John. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, Sam, it was great talking to you. I'm sure sometime this year we'll talk to you, maybe as we get closer to the end of summer, and we want to talk to folks about these. I'm very interested in that theory. I've jotted some notes down for our next conversation. That scrape line theory. I'm very interested in that. So maybe we'll talk to you guys about that, maybe July or August. So.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds great.
Well, safe travels, Sam. I know it's you said the roads are kind of icy down there. I know it's snowing up here. So take care, and we'll talk to you in a few months.
Great. Thanks a lot, John.
Okay. Thanks, Sam.